In the previous 100 days, I successfully got a full set of netherite armor and one of each netherite tool. But in the process, I'd kind of defaced much of the village, which had graciously served as my base of operations while getting said netherite gear. So going into this set of 100 days, I had two goals. Goal number 1, remodel the village because leaving it in this state is just completely unacceptable. Goal number 2, don't take 2 years to finish this video unlike last time. So on day 101, I made my way to the village so that I could start enacting the plan. The first step of which was to put the pointed dripstone below the blocks. There's a reason the trader sells 10 and not 8. The 2 pointed dripstone left over after crafting 2 blocks are not extraneous. They need to go under the blocks if you hope to get more. And of course I couldn't resist buying blue ice because I can't argue with the voice in my head that says, we might need it. While I had decided to remodel the village, I had not decided exactly how I wanted everything to look. So for all I knew, we might need it. However, it seemed likely that I'd use similar materials to the wool farm to keep things at least a little cohesive, so I started chopping down spruce trees. The lesson I learned from building the cabin was that I should try to get the supplies together before construction. And since the village is much larger than my modest cabin, it stands to reason this project will require a lot more materials. Which meant I needed wood to make chests to store said materials. The attic of the wool farm seemed the best location for those chests since it was the only finished structure in the village, and the easiest way to clean up the unseemly collection of chests that results from gathering a large amount of resources is to not make it in the first place. The unseemly chest collection, that is. So the solution is to put the chest collection where it makes sense for chests to be, regardless of the current construction status. But of course I ran out of wood. On my way back, I remembered that I never acknowledged that the mangrove tree did grow up, so I figured I should harvest that. After breaking the roots, the moss carpet just sat on the water. I left it there because I wasn't sure if I could put it back, and it looked odd, but interesting. After replanting the propagules, I returned to tree chopping. Like last time, I want to respect your time by avoiding unnecessary redundancy. So if I say something like, I spent the time gathering resources, or there's an unexplained jump in time, there's a good chance I was chopping up spruce trees and then either trading sticks for emeralds or crafting chests and other items for a non-zero percentage of the time. On day 102, I found oak saplings in one of the houses and made a quick run through the desert to the nearby jungle to get some bamboo. While looking for a good location to plant the bamboo and oak saplings, I realized one of the villagers had fallen into this hole. With this block removed, they should be able to figure out how to get out on their own. For the oak saplings, this area away from all of the buildings was probably the safest option to avoid villagers suddenly getting a lung full of lumber. And for the bamboo, I didn't have to worry about villagers suffocating, so I just placed them along the path. That night was then dedicated to more resource gathering. On day 103, I intended to make a bunch of spruce trapdoors, but accidentally made slabs. However, I had used slabs when making the wool farm building, so what would it hurt to stock up now so that I wouldn't have to worry about crafting them later? Granted, this was less space efficient than leaving them as logs, but at least it would save future me some time. With over a chest of slabs, it was time for trapdoors. This was also the day I remembered I could use the wool farm to get emeralds from the shepherd since I wouldn't be bed mining. Ah, you again. You interested in going to the nether? I'll take that as a not yet. Later, I harvested the wheat. I'd need it for packed mud for mud bricks anyway. So go ahead and add wheat harvesting to the list of resource gathering activities. I then purchased bricks and gray glazed terracotta from the stonemason. Don't think I mentioned it in the previous video, but when remodeling a village, I do like to incorporate blocks that the local villagers, such as this stonemason, happen to be selling. I'd figure out how to integrate it with the rest of the palette at some point. In the meantime, all of the non-wool farm palette blocks went in these chests towards the back, while the bricks and other blocks that had been used in the wool farm went in the chests towards the front. It was back to resource gathering that night, though I did take a small break when I noticed the oak saplings hadn't grown into trees. I thought the lack of light could be the issue, so I placed a torch nearby. A tree grew almost immediately afterwards, so yay for successful troubleshooting. On day 104, after harvesting the new oak tree and planting the saplings, I stored the oak logs for later near the front of the chest area with the other wool farm pallet blocks. I think this is as good a time as any to add wool trading to the list of resource gathering activities. No dripstone yet, but I purchased more bricks, gray glazed terracotta, and why not the quartz blocks too? I have no solid plans for any of these, but the stonemason is selling them, so I might as well get them. After depositing those items in the wool farm, I harvested the beetroots, added to the list of resource gathering activities. Of course, I gave one to Barry before selling the rest to the farmer and throwing the seeds into the seed bin. On second thought, maybe we just call it crop harvesting instead of calling out each type of crop? Speaking of which, I was gonna add oak tree harvesting as well as making oak wood blocks to the list of resource gathering activities, but let's just call it tree harvesting to keep it simple. That night saw the reappearance of the dirt to mud wall to make packed mud on day 105. However, there was a non-zero chance future me would want regular packed mud and not just the bricks, so I stored them as packed mud for the time being. On the topic of resource gathering, I think we'll add buying bricks, terracotta, and quartz to the list. I can't tell you how many times I've stumbled trying to say gray glazed terracotta when reading this script so far. After even more resource gathering, I grabbed the seeds from the seed bin, ran back through the nether to the cabin, and put them in the composter array. While I was there, I grabbed the dirt and wheat I'd left behind since I still needed to make a lot more packed mud. I also grabbed some cocoa beans and jungle saplings so I could start growing cocoa beans back at the village for more brown glass. On day 106, I started setting up a cocoa bean growing area in this space above the wool farm, but I'd need more jungle wood. While waiting for those saplings to grow, I impulsively bought a bunch of tropical fish from the wandering trader.
And how will those help you in remodeling the village?
Glad to see you're back. Well, while I could make an argument for the fact that this gets me a bunch of buckets without needing to use iron, the truth is, I just wanted them. After more resource gathering, I went back to the mine below the wool farm to gather granite for mixing with the brick blocks, and gathered more dirt for mud as well. Ooh, iron. I then thought, oh hey, since I'm mining, maybe I should get some copper for a lightning rod. But then I realized that the only post 1.19 blocks in this area would have spawned below Y0, and so there was no copper to find here. Once back on the surface, I put the granite in the brick chest and went back to turning dirt into mud. After a relog, the sky looked a bit more ominous on day 107, but that's what I get for relogging during a storm. Back to mud making. And of course it turned into a thunderstorm. I really didn't want to lose the entire day, so I figured I'd at least go to the nether. Trouble was, I didn't really have any idea what I should do in the nether. Though I figured I could at least say hi to the piglin child and see if I left anything valuable in the netherite mine. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything that exciting in the chests, but I was able to check up on the kid. After grabbing a bunch of netherrack from the chest, I started branching out away from the portal. After all, I might want to use the nether to find trial chambers when 1.21 released. Though that has made me realize I didn't specify that I started this 100 days in 1.20. Anyway, the basalt deltas went on for a while. The only other biome I encountered was this patch of nether wastes before I decided to start making my way back to the portal. I figured I'd only be losing the night if I had to sleep to get rid of the storm, so I went back to the overworld. And it's already clear. I guess that works. So I went back to making mud into day 108. And the sky still looks ominous. Very cool. Oh, hi there, cleric. Yeah, I know this dirt wall is unsightly, and I still haven't made you a new structure, but that's why I'm getting all these supplies together during this first 50 days, so that then I can just focus on building and not gathering resources later. No, I don't have any solid plans for what I'm going to make just yet. I'm sure my brain will supply that later. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to work now. Ooh, new wandering trader. I got an orchid and kelp. Kelp is always useful. And slime. But after more resource gathering, the farmers still hadn't refreshed their trades, So the unofficial dye chest was as good a place as any to stash the beetroot for the time being. Later that night, I noticed one of the jungle trees finally grew, so the cocoa bean operation could be expanded. Unfortunately, there's only one space between each log, so I couldn't place beans on all sides of every log, but it was good enough for now. I then went back to resource gathering into day 109. But just as I was going to harvest the newest oak tree later that day, I realized we had some new buzzy friends. Guess I forgot that beehives can generate on trees. Randomly picking up leaf blocks has been annoying with all of the tree chopping going on, but maybe it's for the best my axe had silk touch after all. After that, I harvested the bamboo and made the first bamboo blocks. I could probably work these into the village at some point too, so add getting bamboo blocks to the resource gathering list.
But isn't that redundant when you have tree harvesting on the list already?
Well, bamboo isn't technically a tree, it's a grass. So, I'm stumped, if you'll pardon the pun.
What if you rename it to wood harvesting?
I'm not sure if bamboo can be called a wood since it's not a tree, but I guess people use the phrase bamboo wood, so that works? Anyway, I continued resource gathering into day 110. I took a break to check and nope, still no additional dripstone. And while trading with the mason, I accidentally bought polished diorite. Hopefully future me would find a use for it, but it definitely hurt to waste the emerald. After more resource gathering, the farmer refreshed their trades so I could sell off the beetroot, the proceeds of which I could use to buy glowstone and blue ice from a new wandering trader. After another jungle tree grew, there were enough logs to cover all the bits of raised glass. Later, I had to spend some time consolidating the wood and mud bits strewn in the different chests because I was getting tired of rifling through a bunch of random chests. I also consolidated the flint to give to the Fletchers and then put the rest in a chest for later. Listen, I know it looks like I'm wasting emeralds, spending them on shears instead of more building materials, but the wolf farm is basically free emeralds, and with more shears, I won't have to worry so much about the durability of each individual set of shears. More shears equals more emeralds. Eventually. Speaking of the wool farm, needing to walk through the underside of the wool farm to reach the wool chest was getting annoying. So I stopped the cart and moved the chest and hoppers over to the side closest to the Fletchers and Shepherd. Fortunately, I remembered to put the torch back and get the hopper minecart back on the move before I spent the rest of the night on more resource gathering. And still no dripstone. After another relog, the sky was back to normal on day 111. Perfect weather for resource gathering. On day 112, I found a baby donkey. So I got a lead and took the donkey over towards the cows so it wouldn't be alone. Another trader appeared, so I bought more blue ice and then bought lanterns and glass for future building. Such purchases should probably go on the list of resource gathering activities too. Maybe I should change the entry to trading with villagers and traders though. It was then time to harvest sugarcane and wheat as well as feed the cows so I could get more leather to get books. After repeating those last two steps, I ran the seeds over to the composter array and fed the cows once again when I returned to the village. After more resource gathering, I realized that the donkey was missing on day 113. Fortunately, it had just wandered down by the river. I probably accidentally released the lead while feeding the cows. After even more resource gathering, including buying more shears for the wool farm, I was getting kinda tired with repeatedly running to the cabin to use the composter array, especially since it only processes the seeds when I'm at the cabin. So I decided to make a composter array at the village using the farmer's composter. After using the new array and feeding the cows yet again, I finished putting chests in the wool farm's attic so that it was comfortably filled, which meant I could resume resource gathering into day 114. That is, until I purchased some mending books from the librarian, which I added to some of the used shears from the wool farm, breaking an anvil in the process. My reasoning for spending emeralds on mending books was that with all the trading I was doing, there was a bunch of excess XP, so why not convert that into sheer durability for the wool farm for more emeralds? But of course, none of the Fletchers or the Shepherd refreshed their trades yet, so it was back to resource gathering. Still no dripstone. Getting leather also meant there was a lot of excess beef, so I made a smoker in the hopes of eventually getting a butcher to sell it to. On day 115, it was back to resource gathering until I tried to tame the donkey. So now I had a donkey. That's potential extra storage while traveling. Back to resource gathering again into day 116 until I found a second bee nest. So now there were 2 bee nests with bees in them. After even more resource gathering, I learned that, if nothing else, the donkey was useful for getting out of the cow pen when I accidentally clicked on the horse. I also learned while trying to repair more shears that the wool farm hadn't been keeping up with how quickly I'd been trading, so I wasn't able to finish repairing the shears. And of course it started raining while I was trying to figure out what to do next. At least it was late enough that I wouldn't lose too much time by sleeping to get rid of the rain. On day 117, I finally got a butcher, but, I didn't think that trade would be very good with Barry so close by. So we try again. That's better? I mean, yeah, rabbits are cute, so I feel a little bad, but not that bad. Especially since there's a desert right over there where I can get some. And, they don't seem to have much of a self-preservation instinct, which quickly became apparent. However, this would probably be more efficient if I simply farmed them back in the village, so I grabbed some carrots, and of course I replanted them because I may be a monster, but I am a responsible monster. With all these carrots, I figured it wouldn't hurt to feed them on the way so that we could get as many as possible as quickly as possible. After checking to see if any more would quickly spawn, there were 7 rabbits, which was a good start. But I hadn't really taken into account that they might perish on the way back. So I guess it was good we started with so many. I mean, 4 is over 50% of our original group, so it could be worse. I didn't feel like crafting fence posts, so I just dug a hole in the ground so that they didn't run away. Another trip to the desert yielded 4 more rabbits. Who would have guessed rabbits would be safer swimming across a multiple meter deep river rather than jumping down a hill? With those rabbits added to the pit, we were well on our way to leveling up the butcher without hurting any berries. So I decided to go back and forth feeding the cows and rabbits. But when I went to feed the rabbits a second time, I was reminded that cats tend to spawn in villages. So it was time to make a fenced-in pen instead and make sure there was at least 2 blocks between the fence and the higher ledge to avoid any further feline misfortunes. It also needed some lights so I could actually see what I was doing. Day 118 began with getting more rabbits. This is a good time to remember that when you need to restart a project, you're not starting at 0, but at experience. Once I finished struggling to get them all into the pen, it was back to the desert to grab some more. I managed to find 5, and thankfully they were all able to get into the pen before any more cats could show up. And this is how I learned that bunnies apparently do not depend on their parents' coat color the way wolves, sheep, and cats do. Huh, it wasn't blue ice, but a wandering trader appeared with cherry saplings. For the sake of conserving emeralds, I only purchased the 1 needed to get started, and I planted it over by the cleric so they had something nice to look at until their new structure was ready. Good news, the fence is doing its job. Better news, I still have all this fish with no other real use for it. I still don't know for sure if domesticated cats contribute to the mob count and thus prevent additional cats from spawning, but I may as well tame them so I can sit them down away from the rabbits, right? I had wondered if maybe tamed cats wouldn't be hostile to rabbits, similar to how tamed wolves are no longer hostile to sheep, but that does not appear to be the case. Fair enough. These rabbits were safe to live another day, so I spent the rest of the day resource gathering, except for a brief pause when I saw that one of the traders left their llama behind. Free leather. On day 119, I fed the rabbits, gained another cat, and resumed resource gathering. Nothing too exciting, but while tending the cocoa beans, I learned that apparently cocoa beans can force you into crawl mode. I'm not sure if that knowledge is useful, but it is knowledge. So I continued resource gathering into day 120. Unfortunately, we lost a second anvil, but I continued on through day 121, and into day 122. However, I couldn't find the butcher, so I tried breaking the block and replacing it. When the green particles appeared, but I still didn't see the butcher, I had a look around the village. I even checked the hole where the nitwit was trapped last time. Looks like the sheep still hadn't figured out how to escape. But then I noticed the nitwit walking at the edge of the village, and into a hole I hadn't realized was there. Sure enough, that's where the missing butcher had ended up. After some quick block breaking, the nitwit and butcher were safely above ground. I then covered the hole so no one else would accidentally fall down, and checked if the cave had anything interesting. I found some coal, which would be useful for upgrading the butcher, but not much else. Back at the surface, I completely covered the hole, but placed some torches so that I wouldn't forget where it was if I decided I needed more coal. However, the butcher must have hit their head when they fell down that hole because, for some reason, they suggested the village eat berry again. After another block break and replace, they suggested chicken, which I had no intention of farming. So, thinking that maybe the butcher would be able to think more clearly later, I resumed resource gathering through day 123, until I realized that the donkey had somehow made its way into the rabbit pen. I guess that's fine? Of course, day 124 had more resource gathering until I finally grabbed the saddle from the horse to get the donkey out of the rabbit pen. I then moved the smoker to be closer to the butcher and did some trading, but I needed more rabbit to level up the butcher. And of course they're not buying beef. Wonderful. At least the cherry tree finally grew before I resumed resource gathering into day 125. I finally decided to harvest the cherry tree, though I wasn't expecting to get quite this many saplings from one tree. I wonder if they made the drop rate for saplings unusually high to compensate for how many people would want to just keep the pretty leaves. But then it was back to resource gathering into day 126 until I broke a third anvil. At this point, I seriously considered duplicating some anvils. Granted, trying to fill the wool farm with upgraded shears probably shouldn't have been a high priority task in the first place, but like I said before, selling wool seemed like an easy way to get emeralds. And besides, I really wanted to wait for 1.21 to start any new buildings so I could use new blocks. But to ease my guilt about not building anything new, I figured I could continue developing the area around the wool farm, starting with the path around the wool farm by replacing the path blocks with oak slabs. In case you were concerned about the ecological impact of this construction, I did relocate some of the sunflowers I had to move. While I primarily wanted to use oak slabs, stairs just made dealing with elevation changes easier. I was okay with this corner, but I had no idea what to do with this mess, so I let that be a problem for future me. But on day 127, I had wound up back at the confusing place. So I went the other way instead. And there's two of you now. Not sure which one of you was the one that helped me find the missing butcher, but thanks. And finally, after some more resource gathering, one piece of dripstone generated. 27 days. 27 days for one singular piece of pointed dripstone. With most of the easy part of the path done, I still hadn't handled the cleric's building, but I was starting to think that the current space was too small. But for as perplexed as I was about the cleric's new building, I was at even more of a loss of what to do for the town center. So I did the only thing I knew for sure, which was more resource gathering through day 128, except for the time it took me to break the rest of the saplings because I was getting tired of dealing with all the floating trees, and there was probably enough oak to do most of the village anyway. Day 129 began with more resource gathering, but then I rethought my decision to be done with growing oak, so I put some of the saplings back. After more resource gathering and continuing the path around the village, I finally worked up enough courage to tackle refactoring this section of the village path. I had hoped to use the existing village layout as a guide of where and how to build and terraform, but I ended up not sticking strictly to where the path blocks had been when continuing the paths. On day 130, I continued to terraform, and while evaluating the area, I realized I somehow made and left a mud block in the small pond next to the wool farm. And after verifying this was just a shallow ravine, I paved over the top so I could start working the path towards this area. After that, I tried to think about what to do with the cleric, and I figured I had to remove the cherry tree before I could handle the cleric's building. So I worked at getting that down. And this is when I realized the purple bark of the cherry log kinda fits with the cleric's purple robes. I mean, they are both shades of purple. So I replanted a lot of cherry saplings to ensure future me would have plenty of cherry to work with. I still hadn't decided what to make, but I could figure that out later. Ah, I hadn't realized there was a pit behind the wool farm. Cool. With the saplings planted, I could resume installing the path. This pile of hay bales would need to go. Faced with the prospect of needing to figure out how to handle a diagonal stair, I just added enough dirt to avoid that. I then decided to make the pond by the wool farm smaller so that I could continue the path, which meant it was finally time to remove the rest of the cobblestone from the old building. With that out of the way, I could work at connecting the path. And now it's connected on day 131, so I could relocate some more sunflowers and fill in where the cobblestone had been. Of course, I found even more partially buried ponds that could be terraformed later. At least this is also the day I remembered I still had an iron sword with looting too, which would obviously be more advantageous than using the netherite sword that had no looting whatsoever. So I bought 2 more swords from the weaponsmith, quick intermission to buy more gunpowder from a wandering trader, and did the necessary combining to get the iron sword up to looting 3. After another stint of resource gathering, I realized that the plants in the center row of the farm didn't seem to be growing correctly. Probably because of the light. So I finally put some lights in below the water blocks.
And why didn't you just put some cheap blocks with torches above the farm instead of using glowstone?
Because I think they look unpleasant. It was then back to resource gathering into day 132. The new trader that showed up that day had nothing of value, but that did remind me to check the dripstone, and there were 2 new pieces. I then upgraded the iron sword with mending before resuming resource gathering, during which I broke yet another anvil, so now we've lost 4 anvils. At 31 ingots of iron per anvil, that's 124 ingots of iron. Just 4 ingots less than 2 entire stacks of iron. I'm not mad. Day 133 was primarily resource gathering again, but then I realized I could have been selling red dye to the shepherd. 12 red dye for 1 emerald. Meanwhile, the farmer had been asking for 15 beetroot for 1 emerald. A 25% increase from the shepherd's price. So I drew 2 conclusions. First, I needed to stop giving the farmer beetroot when I could instead turn it into dye to sell to the shepherd. Second, I needed to make more space for beetroot to grow. In a similar vein, I realized I could have been selling brown dye from cocoa beans to the shepherd. So on day 134, I started doing just that. Of course, this could be covered by trading with villagers and traders to join the roster of resource gathering activities. Later, I realized this pond near the bamboo had gravel, so I figured it was time to get some flint to sell to the Fletchers. Of course, I didn't want to leave it ugly, so I grabbed a bucket to remodel the pond, which ended up being slightly under this sunflower hill. So I did some terraforming of that hill. I considered connecting it to another nearby pond, but they were on different Y levels, and I didn't really feel like dealing with that. But of course, on day 135, I realized the higher pond also had gravel, so it was flint finding time once again. Nearby, there was another partially buried pond to expose, the far end of which was very close to the previous one. And while terraforming around the 2 ponds, I found yet another patch of buried water. So I connected that. Ooh, coal. Finally, the 2 ponds were connected. Back under the surface, I realized there was more gravel under the coal. Incidentally, the gravel patch was connected to the other pond. After some more terraforming, there was so much dirt in my inventory that I needed to drop it off in a chest by the Fletchers. While returning to terraforming, I decided to leave this large oak that was over the pond, because for some reason it just looked right for it to be there. After getting the coal and gravel below the pond, I started thinking about where I could put more farmland. So I measured out the area to the north of the current farmland. It was good I kept the bamboo pond separate from the tree ponds after all. Day 136 began with some light terraforming to make room for the farmland. And again, I was ecologically responsible and relocated the flowers to a safer location. With that done, it was time to make some oak fences and gates to put around the farmland. Of course, that meant I had to actually till the soil and place the water for the farmland. The nearby pond made getting water for the farm quite a bit easier, so it was definitely a good place to put more farmland. Once all the water was in place, I tilled the rest of the soil, placed some fence posts, and added lanterns around the farm. Since I needed more fence posts to place the last of the lanterns, I put a crafting table underneath the fence gate between Barry's farm and the new farm, to make the process of making more fence posts a bit less painful. And finally, the new farm was completely enclosed. I was thinking there should be a path on this side of the wool farm, but then I realized even more farmland could fit on this side of the wool farm too. But I wasn't sure if I should continue into this area with sunflowers and an elevation change, so I decided to add the necessary water for the area that was already level. Day 137 started with getting seeds to put in the new enclosed crop farm. After that, I composted the remaining seeds and returned to more resource gathering. Later, I realized I had just one singular lantern left in my inventory, but instead of doing something smart like put it in a chest, I just placed it on the ground. At least it provided light, I guess? Adding to my frustration, I had one set of shears left to put mending on after selling excess book to the librarian, and I was exactly 1 emerald short of getting a mending book. And if that wasn't enough, after a relog, there was rain. And if that still wasn't enough, after feeding the cows, I realized the donkey was missing yet again. After feeding the cows again, there was still no donkey. At least these cherry trees grew in the meantime. And after some beetroot harvesting, I could use the excess seeds to fill out the rest of the new enclosed crop farm. That was enough procrastination that I felt comfortable resuming work on the unenclosed farmland on day 138. This is also the day I learned that the shepherd would buy exactly 3 stacks of dye at a time, so that was good to know. And while composting excess seeds, I almost composted my pickaxe. Granted, I don't think my pickaxe was in any real danger, but it's the way I get excess seeds, so it's the thought of it. And in the midst of resource gathering, I accidentally made torches instead of sticks. I had been counting on using that coal for trading. On day 139, I tried looking for the donkey from the top of this hill in the desert near the village. Did the donkey fall down this ravine? There it is. Since I suspected that I was accidentally breaking the lead when feeding the cows, I attached the lead to Barry's farm instead. I also started selling leather to the leather worker. After all, they'd end up buying rabbit pelts eventually as well. This is also the day I realized the cleric's brewing stand could be restocked with plain water bottles. So what if we eventually put the cleric in some kind of cafe? After more resource gathering, I returned to working on the cropland and decided to lower this raised area, as well as relocate the sunflowers, of course. So I made more oak gates and fences, extended the farmland, and finally placed the gates, fences, and lanterns. But on day 140 I ran out of lanterns. So I did some beetroot harvesting, including in the new crop area, to eventually get more emeralds for more lanterns. I had so many seeds I even put beetroot into the new, not quite finished crop area to hopefully get even more emeralds in the future. Do we call this the new farm? Because there's the original farm where Barry and his bodyguards hang out. There's the new farm which runs perpendicular from Barry's farm towards the ponds. And then there's this one. Anyway, I composted the remaining seeds and resumed the resource gathering process. But then the lightning started. At least it was already nighttime. But day 141 started with another piece of dripstone, so there was enough for another block, but of course we still needed another piece before it could generate more. Since the shepherd was buying so much brown dye, I used the 2 spare jungle logs to expand the bean growing area, and planted the 2 jungle saplings to eventually get more jungle logs. Speaking of trees, after more cherry harvesting, there was over a stack of saplings. So I planted even more saplings. In retrospect, maybe I should have just started stockpiling the leaves. The particles are rather nice to look at. In practically no time, the jungle trees were ready for harvesting, so I added those logs to the growing area and put beans on them before getting carrots to plant next to the beetroot in the new farm. There wasn't quite enough for the row, but it was a start. After some more resource gathering on day 142, only 3 of the 16 dispensers in the wool farm weren't completely filled with shears, so at least I had something to show for my efforts. even if it's only visible by going and looking inside each of the dispensers. But after some more resource gathering, that was the last set of shears, so all 16 of the dispensers were filled. I just need to finish putting mending on all of them. And of course I needed a pair for myself. I can't just take one from the wool farm, we all know I'd forget to put it back. Unfortunately, I only had one singular glowstone to put into the new farm before I resumed fencing in the new farm. I definitely felt better with it being enclosed, even if things could still wander in because of the raised grass blocks outside. I could add lanterns to the sides of the farm, but I'd need more glowstone for the center eventually. On day 143, I started filling in the new farm with wheat seeds, and expanded the carrot row by the tiniest bit when I realized the farmer had been breaking the beetroot and berries farm to replace it with wheat. Why? After even more resource gathering, there was so much beef that I figured it was time to work on getting a second butcher, which meant I needed to make more bread. And when the villagers woke up on day 144, I gave them the bread. After that, I was tending the new farm when I found an egg. Ah, the chicken must have wandered in over the fence. And now the new farm was completely filled in. Later, when I was harvesting, my inventory was completely full, so I tried to use up some of the seeds by replanting, and, watching this back, it's kind of funny to watch the chicken chase me. On day 145, I added more crafting tables to the area with the Fletchers, as well as some additional chests between the Fletchers to try to be a bit more organized with the trading materials. It had become a mess between the dirt from terraforming and the dye materials for trading with the shepherd. So now there was a separate dye chest for the shepherd. But I then had to relog, which meant it was raining again. How did this nitwit get stuck? Oh, right, the grass. I spent the rest of the time resource gathering into day 146, until I saw another villager got stuck in the new farm. So it was time to do something about these grass blocks. I guess I could have let the villager out of the new farm before I got rid of the grass blocks, but I didn't trust them to not immediately jump back in, trampling more of the crops in the process. Finally, I picked up the lone lantern I had set down on the ground, and realized rather quickly that it was very dark without it. So I added some lighting at the entrance of the wool farm, and started adding the path that would go between the wool farm and the new farm. Remember when I said on day 126 that I was thinking about duplicating anvils? Look what this wandering trader brought on day 147! And gunpowder's always nice as usual. You know, in a way, I would be converting this bone meal into iron. Neat. It was then time to make a fresh anvil since the current one was very heavily damaged, grab some nether brick blocks, along with dirt from the wool farm, some levers, slabs, and finally go through the portal. A chicken had wandered its way into the nether, but it seemed like it was just looking into the distance deep in thought, so I wasn't too worried for it. Using the nether brick blocks, I started building a platform close to the portal and then added some dirt, levers, and the drip leaves. However, I needed to return to the overworld since I ran out of dirt. And the chicken followed. I guess they were done thinking. While I was here, I figured I'd get some more drip leaves for the platform as well, since there was enough space to add more. On day 148, I returned to the nether to install the additional drip leaves. With those in place, it was time to expand the platform because falling into a lava lake in a basalt delta wasn't really my idea of a fun time. Despite having multiple stacks, I ran out of nether brick blocks, so I grabbed some netherrack from the mine to make more brick blocks. I did also look for lava, but I must have already grabbed all the lava in the mine, so I grabbed some from the basalt deltas before heading back to the overworld. After I placed the new anvil, of course. I definitely didn't almost forget that's just a visual bug. If only I had farmed dripstone correctly in the previous 100 days, I could have had unlimited lava by now. But that reminded me, and there was one more piece. So it was time to get the third block ready to go for farming dripstone. It's good I left at least 3 blocks of water from this pond while terraforming. And after grabbing a trapdoor, it was good to go. On day 149, I returned to the nether again to find I had forgotten to place the slabs. So it was time to fix that. With the slabs in place and the last brick block placed, it was time to grab some more lava to put in the furnace. More gunpowder equals more joy. After that, it was time to plant a 2x2 jungle tree, since I wanted to expand the area for farming brown dye. I then decided to convert some of the slabs to barrels. Gotta say, I'm not loving the change from sticks to planks. I then spent spent the rest of day 149 and some of day 150 repeating a cycle of adding more nether brick blocks to the platform, grabbing a bucket of lava, returning to the overworld to put the lava and netherrack into a furnace, and then returning to the nether to place the freshly duplicated anvils, and more blocks for the platform. On day 150, I took a break from that cycle to enlarge the pond next to the wool farm because having water here was very useful. However, this meant the new building for the cleric would definitely need to be in a different location. Later, after returning from the nether, I caught the sunrise for day 151, at which point I took a break to wait for 1.21 to release. After all, since I'd split the previous 100 days over 2 different versions, I thought it would be cool to do that again. But then what was supposed to be a week of waiting turned into about 2 months before I got back to recording. I have no valid explanation. I wish I wasn't this way. However, this did mean I had time to earn and switch to the MCC cape, so I got to wear that for the rest of the video. With this being the second half, yes, I should have been done with harvesting materials, especially since I'd already collected a bunch of bamboo, but surely this would not set a negative precedent for the remaining 50 days, right? I bought more slime balls as well as some more tropical fish. I then remembered that I did want to do 1.21 things since I had waited for the update. So it was time to get a trial chamber map, which we needed more people for that first. So it's probably good the crop farm is much larger than the first 100 days. On day 152, the villagers got their bread, and I finally found the villager who had claimed the one librarian's workstation. Ah, right, I need to level you up before I can get the trial map. I really should have made an automatic sugarcane farm. At least I'd been in the habit of composting all my seeds for bone meal. I am working on remodeling the village, okay? I know it doesn't look like it because I'm growing sugarcane instead of placing blocks, but this is an important step. I need copper bulbs and other stuff from child chambers for the remodel. While leveling up the cartographer, I got an ocean monument map. I might want sea lanterns and prismarine at some point. I definitely wouldn't get them during this 100 days, but I'd have the map ready for when I was up to it. But presently, I'd need more glass panes. And of course, I was exactly 1 trade short. And now we're good. After making a compass, we had our map. So if that direction is west, we need to go that way, I think? I would need to prepare first. But before that, I finished placing jungle logs to have more space to grow cocoa beans. Okay, so I know this looks like I'm just procrastinating, but I needed wood to get a chest to organize what to take with me to go to the trial chamber. And I'll probably need to take some wood with me for crafting too. And I'll need torches. But after organizing my inventory on day 153, I was ready. I made my way through the desert and savanna. Right, they added armadillos. Yet another reason why I need to get copper, since you need that to make a brush. Even though I still don't have a dog. I probably should have brought the donkey. And I could have had a llama if I'd brought a lead. But at least I got to walk through this meadow. And finally we were on the map. There are definitely worse biomes, but dealing with a swamp was annoying. At least the rain finally stopped, but it would seem we merely traded sky water for groundwater. Again, there are worse things, but of course when I passed some lapis on the way down, I couldn't just leave it there. And finally, there were tough bricks, which meant we'd reached the chamber, and more lapis. So obviously the spawners are of exactly 0 value to me in peaceful mode, but there should still be chests with stuff to collect, as well as the copper bulbs and copper grates. Wait, can you get tridents from vaults? So there now is a way to get tridents in peaceful mode. Assuming, of course, that there's some way to get keys in peaceful mode. As I went through the chamber collecting blocks, I realized that to manage inventory, I was probably best off scraping all of the copper blocks to their unoxidized and unwaxed states. This was my first time going through a trial chamber, so I wasn't 100% sure what to expect in terms of layout and loot. But I got a music disc. Like I said, I didn't know there would be water sections, so I spent a non-zero amount of time on day 154 trying to figure out how the chamber could have intersected so neatly with an aquifer. And after getting a free water bucket and an armor trim, I learned that trial chambers can have a mangrove tree. But back to gathering things I didn't already have back home, I grabbed some chiseled copper blocks, some wind charges, and more copper bulbs. On day 155, I found a dungeon that intersected with the chamber. So it took me 155 days to get a singular bone in this world. Very cool. And apparently you can find trial keys in the structure. So maybe I could get a trident. Further exploring yielded a second copy of the same music disc, and I learned that trial chambers can have eggs. After getting most of the copper blocks I wanted, I tried looking for the vault that showed a trident, but I couldn't find it. So I tried another one and got emeralds, arrows, and honey bottles. So no trident for me. I grabbed the last copper block necessary for a full stack, and returned to the surface for day 156. And it was raining once again. This made not getting a trident sting just that tiniest bit worse. Granted, it's not like it would have had riptide for me to use it in the rain, but it's the principle. But there was a trader selling buckets of fish, so I was able to make myself feel a tiny bit better with some retail therapy. I later found some iron on the way back, which also helped. And a block of emerald ore. I'd need to come back for that when I got a pickaxe with silk touch. I also briefly considered mining this copper ore before remembering I literally had an entire stack of copper blocks in my incredibly full inventory. Quick question, is it still a forest fire when it's only one acacia tree that caught fire from this lava pool? If you've been watching this video and wanting to leave a comment but didn't know what to say, you can feel free to answer that question in the comments. Anyway, with that adventure done, I was back in the village. I was sure these pots would be helpful with decorating the village, but I'd have to figure out exactly where I wanted to put them later. Stop looking at me like that, I just got back. Wait, did you finally decide you do want to go to the Nether? Alright, awesome! And this is the problem with these path blocks. Far too easy to get stuck. Breaking the boat is always the most nerve-wracking part. Somehow I forgot I had been duplicating anvils. Personally, I would not recommend standing there, as I've been hit by these before. But fair enough, you seem to have this under control. I had to grab barrels to store the duplicated anvils in, and you're still here, completely unscathed. The anvils must like you more. You want to go down that hallway? Just give me a moment, need to pick up the rest of these before they despawn. You are very eager to go, aren't you? Alright, so if you want to go to the cabin to be with the other nitwit, it's just through that portal. Or you can just hang out here and possibly meet some of the locals. I'm not particular either way. I did, however, need to get back to the anvils and figure out where to put the barrels. Might as well put them in the floor. On day 157, I tried to empty my inventory from the trial chamber quest, but since we got a music disc, might as well make a jukebox and give it a listen. See, even the villagers are enjoying the music. Maybe. I went back to getting resources for the village shortly after. I had forgotten there was a third nitwit. Would you like to go to the Nether as well? All the cool nitwits are doing it. Think about it. Later that day, I checked the dripstone. Not quite enough for another block. On day 158, I remembered I needed to continue putting slabs over the water and glowstone under the water. There were still a couple more spots to light, but it was mostly done. But while continuing to upgrade shears for the wool farm, I realized the unbreaking librarian was missing. There was also a low-level librarian, so it seemed they may have gotten workstations mixed up yet again. I needed to get these lecterns out of the ground anyway. On day 159, breaking and replacing the lectern produced grain particles, so I was hoping that meant the librarian hadn't disappeared. Well, it wasn't the librarian, but it was a librarian. I didn't feel like trying to find the missing librarian, so it was time for yet another round of interviews. Gradually, we ended up inching our way over to the rabbit pen. Seriously, why do you keep running this way? Okay, we're right next to the rabbits. Are you happy now? Oh, I guess you are happy now. For 15 emeralds, that is not a bad deal at all. So I'm guessing this means that whatever I end up doing with the rabbits during this remodel, you'd prefer to be near them, huh? I'll take that as a yes. With the village having an unbreaking librarian once again, I could resume upgrading shears. And the anvil broke. Why are you all looking at me like that? Okay, yes, maybe upgrading the shears shouldn't really be my priority at this time, especially since we're already halfway through this allotment of 100 days. Okay, fine, I'll go back to working on the village, but I do need to get a new anvil. And of course I didn't empty my inventory. Listen, I'm going to need this massive amount of anvils. I haven't figured out exactly what I'll use them for in the remodel, but I'll probably need them for more than just upgrading shears at some point. Anvils can be a very useful, albeit very expensive, decorative block. Okay, good, it's dusk, so I'll be able to continue in peace without those judgmental villagers watching my every move. I really should have made an automatic sugarcane farm. On day 160, I noticed the farmer was still fixated on the crops and berries farm and messing up the rows. To be fair, this is my fault for not giving the farmer some proper farmland to manage. Day 161 brought more gunpowder. And a free lead. With less than 40 days left, it was time to actually focus on building, so I used some torches to figure out the placement of the cleric's new building. I did figure out a block palette and the dimensions in a creative world, so these torches were just going at the corners. It was certainly going to be larger than the cabin. After grabbing some bricks and granite, I started working on the foundation and placed the entrance stairs. Day 162 began with me taking down the stairs because I did them one block off. But then I had to take them down again because nope, it was actually right the first time. After that it was back to working on the foundation. This shallow ravine almost connects with the river. Might have to do something with that eventually. But it was time to harvest the cherry trees. Unfortunately, these are not as easy to harvest as spruce trees. After that, it was time to harvest the mangrove tree. I really should have been farming mangrove during those first 50 days. On day 163, I put the propagules from the mangrove in the pond near where the cherry trees had been. After that, it was time to start putting in the corner columns for the new building. Turns out, leaving it as packed mud and not mud bricks was a good idea. Eventually, I needed to grab more cobbled deep slate to finish the corners, but there was some new dripstone. In fact, there was enough to make one more block of dripstone to generate more dripstone. With that done, it was back to using cobbled deep slate walls in the corners. And then it was time for a quick break to buy more tropical fish before continuing work on the foundation into day 164. Later, installation of the cherry log floor began. This building was going to be so much better than that cobblestone monstrosity, but I will say placing blocks this way can be a bit painful. At least I realized I could use all this quartz to install some fancy quartz brick baseboard along the walls. Excuse me, you are in the way. Listen, I am having a difficult enough time fighting my own procrastination tendencies without also needing to deal with people standing in the way on this worksite. After experimenting with some moss carpet in the entryway, it was back to working on the foundation, and it was day 165 before I knew it. And of course we were visited by relog rain once again. But I wouldn't let some unfavorable weather interfere with continuing the installation of the cherry floor, or starting the mangrove walls. I know the main draw of using mangrove is the rich red color, but I felt the more subdued brown bark would go much better with the other blocks I was using. But of course this wouldn't be an amaranthine mask build without me making the wall one block too long. At least it didn't take much to fix the corner. Since I ran out of mangrove, it was time to light up the area around the pond to make harvesting a bit easier. But even with the light, I still didn't feel like dealing with harvesting at night in the rain. So it was back to installing the cherry floor, with some breaks to place glass panes, and add some trapdoors for detail. With it being light again on day 166, I finally felt capable of tackling the mangrove mess. It's trees like these that really make me wish we could gather more wood via 2x2 trees like with spruce and jungle. With those harvested, I placed the propagules and gathered all of these root blocks. I have no idea what to do with these. But with more mangrove wood, I could resume working on the walls. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have left these one-block areas empty, but I didn't want to close them up, in case I could make a cool secret passage type thing in the future. After running out of mangrove again, it was time to add doors, add trapdoors above the doors for decoration, and add more trapdoors to the outside walls. Once that was done, it was back to mangrove harvesting, which meant even more root blocks. I then noticed the shepherd had somehow left the wool farm building, but I didn't have time to worry about that, so it was back to working on the mangrove walls and adding glass for the sunroom section, which continued into day 167. And the shepherd found their way back to work. Absolutely nothing wrong with a vacation. After ascending and dismantling the mangrove mess again, construction of the sunroom could continue. With the walls up in the sunroom, I could start fixing the foundation wall opposite the main entrance. I am simply not a skilled enough builder to make such a long, uninterrupted wall not look devastatingly boring. After placing the last couple trapdoors in my inventory, it was time to visit the Nether. Of course, I had to gather and replace the anvils before continuing through the tunnel to the cabin. The reason I returned was to chop down the dark oak tree I had gained from my previous adventures. This was also the point at which I realized they had added the recipe for bundles, and they used leather, not rabbit hide. So my efforts to farm rabbit were completely unnecessary, especially since I still hadn't unlocked a beef trade with a butcher. All that digital blood on my hands for nothing. Day 168 began with getting dark oak saplings to take to the village. I also replaced the log blocks because I remembered they needed to be stripped. I guess I could have done that in the village, but I was waiting for more of the leaf blocks to despawn anyway. Anywho, was back to the nether soon enough. After addressing the anvils and returning to the village to place dark oak saplings, I made some chains to make dark oak signs. Hence why the logs needed to be stripped. After a quick break to buy a sea pickle from the trader, I then turned cobbled deep slate into stairs, started the roof, and started placing the signs. These should probably get text eventually, but I wasn't quite sure what to write. After that, I bought more glowstone from the cleric because I thought torches weren't the most aesthetically pleasing option to light up the outside of the building in the long term. And while I didn't particularly care for the moss carpet in the entryway, it was a very discreet way to cover the glowstone. And all of that left me with enough levels to upgrade one more set of shears. Day 169 started with more mangrove gathering. I still don't know what to do with all these root blocks, but at least I could continue construction on the building. Probably shouldn't have waited until sundown to do a distance check on how the building looked, but back to construction. On day 170, I was still working on the southern wing, which included adding some gray glazed terracotta decoration to the floor. However, I'd placed it one block too far south. At least it was fairly painless to fix. Though now I wanted to add terracotta to the area near the entrance as well. There is something almost mesmerizing about placing glazed terracotta. Have you come to evaluate the premises? Alright, back to work. That night I bought more glowstone to continue lighting up the outside, and moved the beehives to be near the crop farms since I'd need to gather honey eventually, and enough dripstone generated to set up another block. On day 171, the bees were taking their sweet time exiting their hives. I'm hoping they didn't somehow get deleted from the nests. I mean, they don't stack, so they must still have bees in them, right? Okay, I guess they just take a while to get awake. With the bees finally up, I duplicated some flowers to get more bees, and so I do another task, make more bees, do some other tasks, make more bees. How did you get in the farm? Did this version do weird things with villager locations or something? Regardless, it was time to make bottles to collect honey. I then decided to borrow the cleric's bottles just until this stage was done, so that I didn't have to spend more glass on bottles. But since there wasn't more honey just yet, I stashed the bottles for later, and resumed working on the building. That included installing a counter for the cleric. A cafe does need some manner of counter. I don't know 100% for sure what the sections of counter that flip up to let people get behind the counter are called, but I saw something that said they are called service flaps. I did also see they can be called trapdoors, so I guess it would make sense that I'm using trapdoors as trapdoors. If any of you 4 people who have made it this far into the video has worked a job where you are required to go behind a counter that has these things and you know what they are called, I would appreciate it if you could confirm if they are in fact called service flaps or trapdoors. And of course it wouldn't be complete without registers. But with the sun up on day 172, I realized I'd accidentally made the sunroom have a 1-block center, so it had to be made wider to match the width of the southern wing. And the Nitwit Inspector is back to make sure I'm not getting off task. Maybe this is the kind of accountability I need to get things done. Okay, this is getting out of hand, now there's 2 of them. Adding terracotta to the sunroom. I definitely think the terracotta is better than only cherry logs since the floor is so large. I then grabbed some honeycomb instead of honey to make beehives to hopefully get more honey and bees faster. Well, eventually anyway. Later, I finally remembered to let the villager out of the crop farm, and placed deep slate tiles to have a nice trim at the top of the mangrove bark walls. Day 173 started with more construction on the south wing, including adding a brick wall behind the counter. Finally, there was enough honey to start the floor behind the counter. Clearly, there's still a lot of floor to go yet, but having such a soft, squishy flooring will ensure that the cleric is comfortable standing behind the counter. And maybe they won't feel compelled to take as much time off as certain other villagers. I then needed to do more mangrove harvesting when I finally remembered something. I had a netherite hoe, which was much faster at breaking the leaves. I guess remembering this on day 173 is better than not remembering at all? At any rate, I then made another beehive, and after some more construction near the sunroom, the rabbits needed to be relocated to continue working on this side of the building. But with the start of day 174, I figured I'd do that later and just finish this section of the wall. I then decided it was time to make use of some of the bamboo by adding bamboo trapdoors for decoration. Quick break for a math lesson. More honeycomb equals more beehives, and more flowers equals more bees. And of course I'm building in the rain once again. Back to the bamboo trapdoors, the one issue with decorating using trapdoors is I didn't think about the fact that the corner can't have two trapdoors in the same block. Fortunately, I thought it looked better for the west wall to just not have trapdoors anyway, and that was definitely not just me coping. But the sunroom needed some trapdoors too. It was then late enough to just sleep the rain away, so day 175 started with turning more flowers into bees. After that, I chopped down the dark oak trees that had grown up and replanted the saplings, before changing my mind and breaking them all since there was enough dark oak gathered for the time being. Time to work on the storeroom behind the counter. One more honey block for the floor. After that, I finally worked up the courage to tackle the mangrove mess once again. And now there's almost an entire hot bar's worth of these root blocks. The day ended with adding more surfaces behind the counter and then considering modifying the larger window in the sunroom. On day 176, I determined that I did prefer the larger window, but the roof needed to come down a bit more. After placing some more glass panes, I started installing some seating in the sunroom. A quick break to gather more honey yielded 2 more honey blocks. Once the seating was done, it felt like the sunroom needed more glazed terracotta rug. And with the rugs in place, it felt safe to clean up the spacing torches. It was then time to decorate the columns with trapdoors, as well as bamboo fences and lanterns to get some lighting in here. And fortunately, there was space to add some more bamboo trapdoors to finish the bottom corners, which made me realize I could do the same up top if I just moved the lanterns and posts down by 1 block. Or did I prefer the lantern on top of the post? They looked better as hanging lanterns. For the sake of simplicity, I decided to just fill the rest of the entryway with more quartz bricks. The first floor was coming along quite nicely. Well, the part that was done anyway. After getting not quite enough honey for another block, I realized that bone mealing small flowers would be far more efficient to make more bees, since it generally gets you more than 1 flower per bone meal, unlike sunflowers. So on day 177, I was still duplicating dandelions along with some poppies, cause why not? In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have done this so close to the cleric's temporary workspace, but I managed to get exactly a stack of each flower. So it was time to make more bees. After stashing the remaining flowers, there was enough honeycomb to make another hive, and enough honey for another honey block. After finally replacing the dirt under the counter with quartz, and putting lanterns and decoration on the last column, it of course started raining. But maybe this was just the motivation I needed to start installing the ceiling. It's good I pre-crafted all these slabs after all. But since just slabs would look odd as well as unstable and I didn't feel like getting fined by the inspector for not having the building up to code, I installed some deep slate tile beams. It would match the trim along the top of the walls at least. After installing the slab ceiling above the sunroom, I ran out while installing the slab ceiling above the counter. Since I wasn't quite ready to handle adding the east wing, I worked on the roof. But then I wasn't ready to handle the storeroom behind the counter, so I worked on the sunroom roof. Later, I grabbed some more slabs to finish the ceiling above the counter because I needed a break, since I was having second thoughts about the sunroom roof. After making more bees on day 178, there was another honey block for the floor. I finally worked up the courage to start working on the storeroom behind the counter. After making yet more bees, there were 2 more honey blocks to add to the floor. And after working some more on the storeroom, I thought it might be nice to have some kind of loading dock outside, so I placed some slabs until I was ready to start that in earnest. But spruce didn't look quite right for some reason. Oak would have to do. Day 179 began with installing some quartz flooring in the storeroom, but I ran out of quartz, so it was back to working on the outside. Later, I accidentally fell in a hole through the honey floor, but the inspector didn't see it and I wasn't injured, so at least I didn't have to file a report. Please tell me one singular bet isn't considered a reportable infestation. After that, I finished installing the rest of the storeroom floor, added some quartz trim to the walls, added the doors to the loading dock, installed the mangrove walls for the storeroom, and placed the rest of the quartz in the entryway. I then took a quick break to get more honey, which yielded 3 more honey blocks to put in the floor behind the counter, before working some more on the storeroom. Since I didn't have much stock to put in the storeroom, I just added a crafting table and a torch until I could figure out a more permanent lighting solution. So it was back to working on the dock to put off figuring that out. But then I started having second thoughts about using oak. Adding jungle fence seemed to help though. Day 180 started with some relog rain. So it was as good a time as any to put more glowstone in the crop farm. After that, it was back to working on the dock by adding stairs to get down to the same level as the river. However, I realized I wanted to make the deck wider. Or is it deeper? Which is the correct word to refer to the distance between the storeroom door and the opposite end of the deck? Anyway, it needed some columns for support, which ended up going down into the river. The supports looked better after the bark was stripped. After that, I added some stairs under the stairs so that they looked better. It's not like I'll see this area often, but it's the principle. After getting enough honey for 2 more blocks, the floor just needed 1 more to be finished. I replaced the storeroom torch with a lantern and added some lanterns to the dock area. I then installed the ceiling for the storeroom, added gates to ensure the security of the storeroom, and placed the decorative jungle trapdoors on the outside of the storeroom. After a relog, it was still raining, so I slept the rain away and woke up on day 181. After yet again more mangrove harvesting, there was more than a hotbar of mangrove roots. The second hotbar's worth of mangrove roots is started, and I still don't know what to do with these. I then made 2 more beehives, and finally got the last honey block for the floor. Some white carpet helped the honey floor to blend in with the rest of the quartz flooring. The time had finally come to move the cleric's workstation to the counter and see what they thought of their new workspace. Well, assuming we get there before sunset. So, what do you think? Yes, the building isn't completely finished, but there is a ceiling above your workspace. Yeah, that's fair. I still need to add tables to the seating area. I may have made just slightly too many bees, so I made more beehives. After confirming the shepherd did indeed sell magenta banners, with my looting sword in hand, I made my way east toward the ocean beyond the village. I soon found my target, squid. I'd need a bunch of black dye, and while yes, I could have gotten ink sacs by fishing, I figured this would be faster. I then figured I'd cull some of the fish too, since I thought they contributed to the number of mobs and thus could have prevented additional squid from spawning. And of course I finally get bones from fish, though it was from a cod, so maybe it's just the salmon that refused to cooperate with me? Except then I got some bones from salmon. Maybe what I was missing last time was a looting sword. By sunrise on day 182, I had 7 ink sacs and 18 bones, so it was back to the village. As I've said before, I like using the same materials as those that the villagers sell, even if I opt to save emeralds by making the items instead of trading for them. The neat thing about magenta banners is if you add some black gradients, it kinda goes with the colors on cherry logs, and I think some curtains really tied the room together. The cleric was eager to get behind the counter, so they must be happy with the decor. They then sold me the last bit of glowstone I needed to finish lighting the farm. Well, it was lit up as much as I cared to do anyway. Since I was done with collecting honey, I got more honeycomb and stashed it for later because I wanted to figure out a better setup for the bees eventually, but there were more pressing matters, seeing as the cleric's building was still not done, not to mention there was a lot more of the village that was still very rough. So I was starting to come to terms with the fact that I might not be able to finish remodeling everything before day 200. So it was back to working on making more curtains, which led me to getting more ink on day 183. That's a baby squid. I am not affected. I am not affected at all. I am merely leaving it alone, because hitting it with my sword wouldn't get me anything. Once I had enough ink to dye the magenta banners, they were added to the windows. After that, it was time for bamboo fences, along with blue carpet since the shepherd sold blue wool, to make some cat trees. Does blue really work with bamboo? I didn't know, but I was running out of time to think about such things. So it was then time to get the cats on the cat tree. Maybe I wouldn't be able to do much more than this building before day 200, but at least I could make sure Phil and Tabitha had a nicer place to live than right next to the bamboo path. I forgot about the water pools. Tabitha, no! You know what? Maybe it's for the best these were removed from World Generation. So, who will sit at the top? It's Tabitha. But I gave her just a little gentle nudge so she wasn't floating over the fence post. And then Phil started hiding in the crawl space. Well, if he wasn't ready to go on the cat tree just yet, that was fine. I'd ask one of the other cats in the meantime. Let's go with this one. Please go on the cat tree? No? Okay, surely one of you wants to join Tabitha. Well, not gonna lie, Tabs, it's not looking good. Ooh, here we go. And of course I accidentally nudged Tabitha. But I can fix this, it's fine. And now you're up there too. Day 184, I was still struggling with trying to get the cats into the cat trees. It looked a little precarious with them all being perched on the edge of their respective trees, but isn't that kinda what cats do anyway? I temporarily blocked off the crawl space because Phil liked going there way too much. And it looks like Phil wanted the top spot. Guess that explains why he didn't want to be below Tabitha. But after situating another cat, it looked like Phil wouldn't be on top anyway. There was still one empty spot, but all of the cats were finally in place in the cat cafe. Time to celebrate by upgrading 2 more sets of shears. On day 185, I started working on making these water pools just a bit safer, so no one else would experience what Tabitha did. While figuring out where to put the dirt, I realized the dripstone needed tending, and I was able to put in 1 more dripstone block. Back to terraforming, since the 2 ponds were only separated by 1 block, I figured I'd just make them into 1. But it didn't look like a natural shape, so I tried fixing that. That's better? I then bought some red sand, kelp, and slime from the trader. I put the kelp in the river, and put the red sand in the nether portal chest to think about duplicating after I was done with the anvils. But then I realized I had apparently bought kelp before from a different trader, so I put that in the river too. Now back to building. I replaced the floor in both entrances with crafting tables, and unblocked the crawl space. With it being so close to the building, something needed to be done with this cropland. And since I needed to move these rabbits out of the way of the new building anyway, why not make this the area to keep the rabbits? So on day 186, I placed water for the cropland. And since I wouldn't be tending this farmland, I wouldn't have to worry about accidentally breaking the block while harvesting. So that's something figured out for one of the many, many mangrove root blocks. I then put some of the carrots back in the ground. Of course, just a fenced-in pen would be boring, so I started using spruce trapdoors to make some type of shed. Packed mud looked alright for the floor. While getting a door for the shed, I was in the process of finally putting the doors back on the wool farm when suddenly the shepherd appeared. I guess they must have felt they needed another break. After putting the spare oak door in the shed, I resumed building up the shed with more trapdoors, and started moving the composter array over so that it would be in a much better spot than just sitting in the middle of the village. The shed is closer to the large new crop farm areas anyway, so it would be more practical. It still needed a roof though. I started day 187 by making sure I could access the input chest for the composter array from the outside. Hey, since you're here, what do you think of the shack? I agree, the farmer will absolutely love it. However, I did need to be careful to construct the roof in such a way that the input chest would still open, and that seemed to do the trick. Then it was time to add some lighting for the farmer so they could actually see inside the shed, and fill out more of the farm with carrots. After the shepherd returned from their vacation, I moved the Unbreaking Librarian's workstation to the inside of the shack, so they could be close to the rabbits just as they requested. And I guess they could keep the farmer company too. After cleaning up some blocks from the center of the village, and continuing to fence in the rabbit farm, it was time to get the farmer over to the pen. After placing the last 2 fence posts and grabbing some carrots, it was time to then move the rabbits. At least there were substantially fewer casualties than when moving them from the desert, though it did take a while for them to filter through the gate. With that done, I added the anti-escape second gate, fed the leftover carrots to the rabbits, and tried to very carefully free the farmer and their bunny friend from the boat. And one of the bunnies somehow escaped. I think this corner may be the culprit. And then I absent-mindedly flipped a trapdoor, so yet another bunny escaped. On day 188, I needed to figure out how to let the librarian in without letting any more rabbits out. I tried to seal up the corner with another trapdoor, but that just let out another bunny. The solution I settled on was to have 2 trapdoors on the ends and replace the path blocks in front with grass. I briefly considered just having the shack be more open, but I quickly realized that was a bad idea, and closed it back in. With that settled, it was back to getting the librarian into the rabbit pen. First step was to grab the lectern through the wall to get the librarian to come to the temporary sand tower. Then I had to gently land the boat in the pen and remove the lectern and the tower so no stray cats wandered into the pen. After that, I put the lectern back into the shack and let the librarian out of the boat. It may not have been the most glamorous addition to the village, but that was 2 more villagers settled into a new spot, and the rabbits were relocated. So now it was back to the cleric's building, and of course you're here. Yes, the roof is still missing, but I was busy getting the farmer and the newest librarian situated. It's not like I was slacking off. I wasn't sure if I'd eventually need candles or something, so I got more honeycomb from the hives. But since it worked so well to have the farmer and librarian in the same area, I figured it might be good to have some of the other villagers share the building with the cleric, especially since I'd made the building so large. So I started adding some bookshelves. But I'd need more leather to finish. While getting wheat for the cows, I fixed the farm for hopefully the last time, since the farmer had been relocated. On day 189, I gave Barry a beetroot, and finally realized I could have just used the spare carpet from the cleric building to get in and out of the cow pen more easily. I'm not usually a fan of how it looks, but I was in a rush to try to at least get the cleric's building done before the end of day 200. And it turns out there was a bunch of leather in one of the wool building chests. With those supplies, I was able to continue adding bookshelves. A layer of oak slabs went on top, and paintings on the sides finished off the center bookcase. So now it was time to add something on either side. Later that night, I discovered the inspector was checking out the area below the floor. They didn't give me a fine, so I'm hoping that means we are fine. On day 190, I started adding some chiseled bookshelves. Thought it would be good to change things up. I also bought some more glowstone to light up the area with the chiseled bookshelves. The lanterns in the corners can only reach so far. Turns out I wasn't done with collecting honey after all. I then mirrored the setup on the other side of the center bookcase. On day 191, I figured out a use for the moss carpet. It was then time to move the 3 remaining lecterns to their spots inside the building. After placing some more glowstone, the 3 other librarians were safely in their spots. After that, it was back to squid hunting to get more curtains for the building. After adding some more lighting, I figured the cartographer would fit in with the librarians. Maps and books are kinda related, right? But first I had to put some chains and gray carpet to finally finish the seating area in the sunroom. Definitely procrastinated on that for long enough. Fortunately, there were 2 pieces of glowstone in a chest which I could place around the cartographer's spot right away. But after a relog on day 192, the unbreaking librarians somehow ended up on top of the jungle tree. And of course the farmer is up there too. I should have realized those 2 would get into trouble. Not sure if it's related, but my render distance did get reset to the maximum. And in the time it took me to get my render distance down to a normal amount, the farmer made their way to the roof of the shack. So I just had to help the librarian down. But I saw the cartographer was checking out the building, so I quickly directed them to their new spot, before returning to save the librarian. I grabbed a boat and chopped a staircase up the jungle tree. Once at the top, I carefully guided the librarian down. At least that was mostly painless. After taking down the rest of the jungle tree, I helped the farmer off the roof of the shack. But then while trying to get the librarian into the pen, I learned that you can't place boats on top of fence posts. And while trying to break the boat, I didn't think before breaking the fence post, and accidentally let the farmer out of the pen along with some of the rabbits. Somehow the farmer found their way back in, probably because I left a block next to the fence. At this point, I figured I should move the jungle saplings a bit farther away from the rabbit pen. But while I was removing the saplings near the rabbit pen, a tree generated. Of course. At least the librarian had found their way into the farm without my assistance, so I could remove the blocks next to the fence, and then chop down the jungle tree. It started raining later, but I didn't feel like dealing with that, especially because I wanted to tear down the cobbled deep slate roof on day 193. The cobbled deep slate stairs and some full blocks would be used for the part under the roof, so making them wasn't a waste. But I decided on a different block for the shingles. Only trouble was, I wasn't quite sure how to handle this part where the roof slopes down a bit. But I could figure that out later. The whole reason I'd waited for 1.21 to record the second half of this video was so I could use the new blocks. And so far, I had not used any of the new blocks. And truth be told, the cobbled deep slate was a bit too noisy for the roof anyway. So I fixed both those problems by using tough bricks for the roof. Putting the signs back in front of the entrance was a bit painful, but I finally worked up the courage to figure out the sloped roof. While grabbing tuff for the roof, I noticed the dripstone needed tending again. There were now 2 more blocks, but the corner looked a bit odd. That was a problem for another time. Back to working on the roof into day 194. But of course it didn't make sense to continue the roof if I wasn't done with the first floor, so it was time to expand east, meaning this oak tree would have to go. I do love it when oak trees are giant like this one, so I'd have to try for a giant oak somewhere else in the village eventually. It may not strictly be expanding the building eastward, but it was important to continue getting glowstone for the cartographer and librarians. And while I don't necessarily think glowstone is an ugly block, I did think it would be best to have some more paintings on the ends to match the central bookcase. I then added some oak slabs on top for similar reasons too. I hadn't figured out where to put the smithing table, but I could at least get it out of the hole in the ground and fill the hole with dirt. And for that matter, I could fill in the holes from the other villagers' workstations as well. Even though that wasn't technically building something, it was still an improvement. I then had the brilliant idea to move the stonecutter closer to the cleric's building and resumed working on the roof. But when I ran out of tough bricks and checked the chest, there was no more tough. So it was time to go down the ladder to get more. Fortunately, there was a bunch of tuff near the end of the ladder, so I was back to working on the roof very quickly. Back to this section again. Does this work? A distance check on day 195 confirmed my worst fears. It looked bad, so I tried to make the slope a little more gradual. Distance check. Okay, we'll try some slabs. Distance check. I cleared my mind with some retail therapy. I am normal and can be trusted with gunpowder. After that, I added even more slabs along with some stairs. Distance check from the top of the mangrove this time. I even used F1 to get a clear look. I was satisfied with what I saw, so I worked on making the other side of the sunroom's roof match. Once both sides matched, it didn't take long to have that section of the roof finished. Time to figure out the rest of the structure. I decided it might be nice to have a second floor for either more villagers or storage, but I also wanted to leave future me the option of using these empty columns as secret passageways. So spruce trapdoors seemed like a good way to have it appear solid without completely blocking the column. After placing more trapdoors on day 196, a distance check confirmed that I could continue placing trapdoors. It's good I crafted so many of these ahead of time. Later, I was buying glowstone when one of the librarians was visiting the cleric. Just so we're clear, I don't have a problem with the villagers socializing, but I figured the librarian might not have known how to gracefully exit the conversation. I mean, I'm not fluent in testificate, but trust me, the librarian was definitely signaling they wanted out, especially seeing how quickly they ran back to their lectern and even went to the carpeted spot. This librarian was also out of their spot, but that makes sense since they were looking at the bookshelf. Probably needed to cross-reference something. After placing a painting next to the librarian I helped escape from the cleric and finishing the trapdoors on the second floor, it was time for the walls, so I decided to try mud bricks. Distance check. It seemed to match the color palette of the first floor without being too matchy-matchy. Success! Though the wall needed to be broken up with more trapdoors. Onto the larger section above the storeroom and cat trees. Another distance check. Yep, the trapdoors look good. I decided to put a large window in the wall above the sunroom. This way it'll let in a bunch of natural light. Though this faces north and not east or west, it should still get indirect light during the daytime, right? Anyway, it's good I pre-made a bunch of this brown glass too. Distance check. Maybe 4 blocks tall is too much window. Distance check. Yep, 3 blocks is much better. So it was time to figure out the flooring in the second floor. It's good I pre-crafted these slabs as well, but then I accidentally fell and bumped Tabitha off of the cat tree. Whoops. Day 197 began with more window installation on the second floor, as well as installing more spruce slab flooring. But I still didn't feel ready to tackle the east wing, so I went back to walls, and adding spruce trapdoors above the storeroom entrance, similar to what had been done in the area above the main entrance. Distance check. It was acceptable enough to start the roof of the second floor, though some of the trapdoors needed to go. At this point, I had been allowing a gap to later put upside-down cobbled deep slate stairs on the underside of the roof, similar to the first floor. Distance check. How would it look without the gap? For some reason, the second layer looked better without the added bulk of having the cobbled deep slate underside. Distance check. The roof was too steep, especially when compared with the sunroom's roof, so it needed some slabs. I probably should have finished the roof above this particular section instead of continuing the roof in a wraparound fashion around the second floor, but this is me we're talking about. Fortunately, after visiting the stonecutter for more tough brick stairs, I came to my senses and resumed working on the section of roof above the main entrance. But I ran out of tough. There was more dripstone to harvest before going down to the mine, so now those last 2 blocks could actually be useful and generate more dripstone. It finally occurred to me to put a water block at the bottom so I could at least get down here more quickly in the future. After gathering some tuff, it was back to roofing in the rain on day 198. Thankfully, it stopped raining not long after. After using some stairs near the top to make the roof slope a bit more gradual as it reached the top, that section was done, so I could move on to the section of roof above the cat trees and storeroom. And once that section of the roof was done, I placed more wall blocks for the central part of the building and finally took down the remnants of the rabbit pen. On day 199, a bunch of the librarians were taking a vacation, so I returned to the ocean to get more ink and finally started building the east wing. I thought an aquarium would be a nice addition. Ordinarily, I'd use full blocks instead of slabs, but I was running out of time and I hadn't completely given up hope of getting this building done before 200 days were up. However, I decided to widen the windows near the cleric, so I still hadn't learned to just focus on one thing at a time. At least it wasn't much later that I returned to the desert near the village to get more sand to continue working on the aquarium on day 200. I bought and placed the last piece of glowstone necessary for the librarians. They were still on break, so I didn't worry about helping them back to their spots, especially since I was in a hurry. I placed the last quartz block to outline the aquarium, and grabbed more sand. Turned out this house's roof had been buried under the sand, so it was probably good I was doing all this digging. I placed the rest of the sandstone slabs and finally added a layer of sand on top. The reason I bothered with the slabs was because I wanted to make sure that any digging future me did wouldn't mess up the sand since it's a gravity block. I then used some of the ink I'd grabbed to make light gray stained glass to start the aquarium. With one layer of glass in place, the tank was ready to begin stocking with the plethora of tropical fish I had bought from the trader. In retrospect, I should have filled the tank with water before adding the fish. We will not speak of this. But with the tank now full, I could add the rest of the fish without further incident. And yes, I could have just gotten fish from the warm ocean near where I hunted for squid, but then I would have been taking them from their home.
And where do you think the trader got them?
I am choosing not to think about that. And it wouldn't be a 100 days video without it ending in rain, I guess. At least I got all the fish in the tank before the end. On the plus side, there were now a whole bunch of buckets free for future use. So I didn't meet my goal of remodeling the whole village. In fact, I couldn't even get the cleric's building done. But I was able to expand the crop farms, and this video didn't take me 2 years to finish. A half step forward is still forward. Until next time, take care.